Tonight, I want to tell you the story of the most ambitious dream ever built by human hands, a dream that stretches 13,000 miles across mountains, deserts, and time itself. A dream that consumed 1,000,000 lives and birthed a legend visible from space. This is the story of how a single man's vision became the Great Wall of China, and how that wall came to hold the dreams, ghosts, and secrets of an entire civilization. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back through the mists of time, to a land where dragons were said to sleep beneath mountain peaks, and where the very earth seemed to whisper stories of ancient kings and forgotten dynasties. We're traveling to China, more than 2 millennia ago, when the world was a patchwork of warring kingdoms, each protected by its own walls, its own dreams of survival. Imagine, if you will, the gentle rolling hills of northern China in the 7th century BCE. The morning mist clings to valleys where small farming communities wake to the sound of roosters crowing and the soft shuffle of feet on dirt paths. But beyond these peaceful scenes, tension hangs in the air like the scent of approaching rain. 7 major kingdoms, Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin, compete for dominance in what historians would later call the Warring States period. Each kingdom built walls. Not the Great Wall as we know it today, but smaller barriers, earthen mounds and wooden palisades that snaked across hilltops and through valleys like sleeping serpents. These early walls were practical things, built by farmers and soldiers using the most basic tools, wooden spades, woven baskets, and their own calloused hands. They would pile earth and stones, ram them down with primitive tools, and crown their work with thorny branches or sharpened stakes. The kingdom of Chu, in the south, built walls of red earth that seemed to glow like embers in the setting sun. To the north, the kingdom of Yan constructed barriers of gray stone that blended seamlessly with the harsh landscape. Each wall told a story of fear, hope, and the fundamental human desire to create a boundary between the known and the unknown, between home and the vast wilderness beyond. But it was in the western kingdom of Qin that something extraordinary began to stir. Here, in a land of rugged mountains and fertile valleys, a young prince named Zheng was growing up with dreams that stretched far beyond the walls of his ancestral home. Born in 259 BCE, this boy would one day become the first emperor to unite all of China under one rule, and in doing so, he would create something that had never existed before, a wall that would stretch across the width of an entire civilization. The Qin kingdom was different from its neighbors in fundamental ways. While other states clung to traditional feudal systems, the Qin embraced legalism, a philosophy that emphasized strict laws, centralized power, and merit-based advancement. This wasn't just a political choice, it was a complete reimagining of how a society could function. Instead of inherited nobility determining one's fate, the Qin rewarded military achievement and administrative competence. As young Zheng grew, so did his kingdom's military might. The Qin armies were disciplined, well-equipped, and absolutely ruthless in their efficiency. They developed new siege techniques, improved their bronze weapons, and most importantly, they perfected the art of psychological warfare. Enemy kingdoms would sometimes surrender at the mere rumor that Qin forces were approaching. Picture the battlefields of this era. Not the grand, choreographed conflicts of Hollywood films, but desperate, muddy struggles where victory often came down to endurance rather than glory. Soldiers would fight with bronze swords and crossbows, their armor made of leather and metal plates that caught the light like fish scales. The air would fill with the sound of drums, the clash of metal, and the thundering hooves of horses whose riders knew that defeat meant not just personal death, but the potential extinction of their entire way of life. By 230 BCE, Yingzheng had become king of Qin, and his conquests began in earnest. One by one, the other kingdoms fell. Han was absorbed in 230 BCE, followed by Zhao in 228 BCE. Each victory brought new territory, new resources, and new challenges. How do you govern a vast territory filled with people who speak different dialects, follow different customs, and have spent generations viewing you as their enemy? The answer, Yingzheng decided, lay in unification on an unprecedented scale. Not just political unification, but cultural, linguistic, and physical unification. And at the heart of this grand vision was an idea both simple and audacious: take all those separate walls built by the conquered kingdoms, and connect them into a single, continuous barrier that would define the northern border of his new empire. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the weight of such a decision. Picture a man standing on a high tower, looking out over maps made of silk and bamboo, his finger tracing the invisible line that would one day become the most famous wall in human history. The wall in his mind wasn't just about keeping enemies out, it was about creating an identity, a sense of shared destiny for the millions of people who would now call themselves citizens of a unified China. In 221 BCE, the last enemy kingdom fell, and Yingzheng declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. But victory in war, he knew, was only the beginning. The real challenge lay in transforming a collection of conquered territories into a single, cohesive empire. And central to this transformation was his vision of the wall. Let yourself sink deeper into the ancient world as we explore the mind of this remarkable, complex figure. Qin Shi Huang was barely 40 years old when he achieved what no ruler before him had even dared attempt. Contemporary accounts describe him as a man of imposing presence, tall for his era, with intense eyes that seemed to see possibilities invisible to others. But more than his physical appearance, it was his absolute conviction in his own destiny that set him apart. The emperor's vision extended far beyond mere conquest. He standardized currency, creating coins with square holes that could be strung together for easy transport. He standardized writing, taking the thousands of regional variations of Chinese characters and reducing them to a single, unified script that would allow a farmer in the south to read a document written by an official in the north. He even standardized the width of cart wheels, ensuring that the ruts worn by wagons in one province would match those in another, making trade and communication infinitely easier across his vast domain. But perhaps his most ambitious standardization project was the wall itself. The emperor gathered his most trusted advisors and military engineers in his capital of Xianyang, a city that buzzed with activity day and night. Imagine the great halls where these discussions took place, vast rooms lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls decorated with silk tapestries depicting dragons and phoenixes. The air would be thick with incense and the quiet murmur of voices debating logistics that had never been contemplated before in human history. General Meng Tian, one of the emperor's most capable commanders, was placed in charge of the wall project. Meng Tian was a veteran of the unification wars, a man who understood both the practical requirements of military defense and the symbolic importance of the emperor's grand vision. Historical records suggest he was a thoughtful leader, someone who could balance the emperor's ambitious timeline with the harsh realities of engineering on such a massive scale. The existing walls presented both opportunities and challenges. Some could be incorporated directly into the new structure, particularly those built by the former kingdoms of Yan and Zhao, whose northern borders already faced the steppes where nomadic tribes posed the greatest threat. But other walls ran in the wrong directions, built to defend against neighbors who were now fellow citizens of the empire. These would need to be dismantled, their materials salvaged and repurposed for the great project. The emperor's wall would not simply connect existing fortifications, it would reimagine the very concept of a border. Previous walls had been primarily defensive, designed to slow down attackers and provide warning of approaching armies. But the Great Wall was conceived as something more ambitious, a permanent statement of where Chinese civilization ended and the barbarian world began. To understand the full scope of this vision, consider the geography of northern China. The landscape shifts dramatically as you move from the populated river valleys of the interior toward the Mongolian steppes. Fertile farmland gives way to increasingly arid terrain, dotted with grass suitable for grazing but too harsh for traditional Chinese agriculture. This wasn't just a political border the emperor was fortifying, it was the ecological boundary between two completely different ways of life. South of the wall would be the world of farmers, merchants, scholars, and artisans. A world of permanent settlements, written records, and complex hierarchical government. North of the wall lay the domain of nomadic herders, people who moved with the seasons, whose wealth was measured in horses and cattle rather than land and buildings. These weren't necessarily enemies, but their mobile lifestyle made them fundamentally different from the Chinese, and that difference bred both misunderstanding and conflict. The emperor understood that his wall needed to address this cultural divide. It couldn't simply be a barrier, it needed to be a statement of values, a physical manifestation of Chinese civilization itself. Every watchtower, every gate, every mile of rampart would proclaim to the world that this was where the civilized world began. As construction planning intensified, the scope of the project became clear. The wall would stretch nearly 3,000 miles from the eastern coast to the western deserts, following mountain ridgelines where possible but also crossing vast plains, deep valleys, and rushing rivers. It would require not just walls, but an entire infrastructure of roads, supply depots, barracks, and administrative centers. The human cost was equally staggering. Conservative estimates suggest that over 1 million workers would be needed, including soldiers, peasants, and prisoners. These weren't just laborers, they were engineers, architects, surveyors, and logistics coordinators. They would need to solve problems that had never been encountered before. How do you build a wall across a mountain range? How do you ensure structural integrity across thousands of miles? How do you supply and coordinate a workforce spread across a territory larger than most European countries? Feel yourself drifting as we contemplate the magnitude of this undertaking. In an age without mechanical equipment, without modern communication systems, without even accurate maps of much of the territory to be fortified, the first emperor was attempting something that would challenge even modern governments with all their technological resources. As dawn breaks over the ancient Chinese countryside, imagine the sound of thousands of feet walking along dirt paths, the quiet conversations of workers heading to their assignments on the wall. The year is 220 BCE, and the greatest construction project in human history is beginning in earnest. Let the rhythm of their footsteps lull you deeper into peaceful rest as we explore the lives of the people who built this wonder of the world. The workers came from every corner of the empire and every level of society. There were soldiers, of course, entire legions reassigned from conquest to construction. But there were also farmers fulfilling their corvée labor obligations, a system where peasants owed a certain number of days each year working on imperial projects. Convicted criminals served out their sentences hauling stone and mixing mortar. And there were volunteers too, craftsmen and engineers drawn by the promise of steady wages and the chance to participate in something unprecedented. One of the most fascinating groups were the soldiers of the former enemy kingdoms. Rather than executing these men or leaving them to plot rebellion in their home territories, the emperor's advisors came up with a brilliant solution: put them to work building the very wall that would protect their new nation. Imagine a former Zhao warrior, who had spent years fighting against Qin expansion, now working alongside Qin veterans to build watchtowers along the northern frontier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but it created an unexpected bond among men who shared the daily hardships of construction work. The work began at hundreds of points simultaneously. Teams would establish base camps near existing fortifications or at strategic points identified by imperial surveyors. These camps became temporary cities, complete with workshops for toolmaking, kitchens capable of feeding thousands, and rudimentary medical facilities staffed by military doctors and traditional healers. The basic construction technique was surprisingly sophisticated. Where earlier walls had been simple earthen mounds, the Great Wall incorporated lessons learned from centuries of Chinese engineering. The foundation would be dug down to solid bedrock wherever possible. Large stones, some weighing several tons, would be fitted together without mortar to create a base that could support enormous weight while still allowing for the natural expansion and contraction caused by seasonal temperature changes. Above this stone foundation, workers would construct parallel walls of smaller stones, creating a hollow space that could be filled with earth, gravel, and broken stone. This rubble core was then tamped down using wooden tools, creating a solid mass that was actually stronger than a wall built of stone alone. The outer faces were then finished with carefully fitted stone blocks, cut and shaped by master masons whose skills had been passed down through generations. But stone wasn't always available. In many sections, particularly in the western regions, the wall was built primarily of packed earth. Workers would construct wooden frames, fill them with soil mixed with grasses and small stones, then use wooden rammers to compact the earth into an incredibly dense, durable material. These earthen sections required constant maintenance, but they could be built much more quickly than stone walls and were surprisingly effective at stopping both human invaders and the erosion that constantly threatened the structure. The most challenging sections were those that crossed rivers or climbed steep mountain slopes. River crossings required temporary diversions while workers laid foundations underwater, a technique that often failed during flood seasons and had to be repeated multiple times. Mountain construction was equally treacherous, with workers hauling materials up slopes so steep that modern hikers would consider them nearly impassable. Consider the daily life of these workers. They woke before dawn in crude barracks or tents, ate a breakfast of millet porridge and pickled vegetables, then walked to their work sites as the sun rose over the mountains. The work was backbreaking. Lifting stones, carrying baskets of earth, operating the wooden rammers that compacted the wall's core. But there was also tremendous camaraderie among the workers, bonds forged by shared hardship and the growing realization that they were creating something truly extraordinary. Evenings brought their own rhythms. After a dinner of rice or noodles with vegetables and occasionally meat, workers would gather around fires to share stories from their home provinces, play simple games with dice or stones, or listen to traveling musicians who moved from camp to camp. These weren't just entertainment, they were crucial for maintaining morale among men who might spend years working hundreds of miles from their families. The technical innovations developed during wall construction influenced Chinese engineering for centuries afterward. Workers developed new techniques for moving heavy stones using wooden rollers and inclined planes. They perfected methods for creating waterproof mortar using rice flour and egg whites, a technique so effective that many sections of the wall remain intact today, over 2,000 years later. They even developed early versions of mechanical cranes, using pulleys and counterweights to lift materials to unprecedented heights. Perhaps most impressively, they created a communication system that allowed coordination across the entire length of the wall. Signal fires could relay messages from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of days, faster than any messenger could travel. During construction, this system allowed engineers to coordinate material deliveries, share technical innovations, and report on progress to the emperor's administrators. The human cost was enormous. Conservative estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of workers died during construction, victims of accidents, disease, exhaustion, and the harsh climate of the northern frontier. These men were buried near the wall they died building, and local legends still speak of their spirits protecting the structure they gave their lives to create. But the survivors took immense pride in their work. Many workers carved their names or symbols into stones, markers that can still be found today by visitors who know where to look. These weren't acts of vandalism. They were signatures of craftsmen who understood they were participating in something that would outlast empires, something their descendants would still marvel at centuries in the future. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the satisfaction of these ancient builders at the end of a long day's work, looking back at the section of wall they had advanced by perhaps a few feet, knowing that those few feet were part of something magnificent that stretched beyond the horizon in both directions. Let the gentle rhythm of ancient winds carry you further into the past, to a time when the wall was more than stone and mortar, it was a living thing, infused with the hopes, fears, and spirits of the people who built it. As night falls over the construction sites, we enter a world where the boundary between the physical and spiritual was as fluid as morning mist. The Chinese workers brought with them a rich tapestry of beliefs that influenced every aspect of construction. Before breaking ground at any new section, ceremonies were performed to honor the local spirits and request their permission to alter the landscape. Taoist priests would consult the I Ching, the ancient book of changes, to determine the most auspicious days for beginning work. They would burn incense and offer rice wine to the dragons believed to sleep beneath the mountains, asking them not to be disturbed by the sound of hammers and chisels. These weren't empty rituals. The workers genuinely believed that the success of their project depended on maintaining harmony with the spiritual forces that govern the natural world. When a section of wall collapsed or materials proved defective, it was often attributed to spiritual imbalance rather than engineering failure. This led to the incorporation of feng shui principles into construction planning, with walls designed to follow natural energy flows rather than simply taking the shortest route between points. The most persistent legend associated with the Great Wall concerns Meng Jiangnu, a woman whose husband was conscripted to work on the wall during its construction. According to the tale, She traveled great distances to bring him winter clothes, only to discover that he had died from exhaustion and been buried within the wall itself. Her tears were so bitter and her grief so profound that the wall itself began to weep, and a section collapsed to reveal her husband's bones so she could give him a proper burial. While historians debate the literal truth of this story, it reflects a very real aspect of wall construction, the tremendous personal sacrifice demanded of ordinary families. The corvée labor system meant that virtually every household in the empire was touched by the wall project. Fathers, sons, and brothers would disappear for months or years at a time, and many never returned. The emotional cost of the wall was as significant as its financial and human cost. Archaeological evidence suggests that workers did indeed sometimes bury their dead within the wall structure itself, particularly during harsh winters when the ground was too frozen for traditional burial. This practice, born of practical necessity, gave rise to countless ghost stories and legends. Workers would report hearing voices calling from within the walls at night, or seeing phantom figures walking along completed sections during the darkest hours before dawn. These supernatural beliefs weren't obstacles to construction, they were integral to the project's cultural meaning. The wall wasn't just a military fortification, it was becoming a spiritual boundary, a place where the living world met the realm of ancestors and spirits. Workers would leave small offerings, pieces of jade, coins, or carved figurines, embedded in the stonework, gifts meant to ensure the protection of those who had died in service to the emperor's vision. The technical challenges of construction were matched by the logistical nightmare of keeping the workforce fed, equipped, and motivated across such vast distances. Supply lines stretched back hundreds of miles to the populated regions of central China. Ox carts and pack animals carried not just food and tools, but also luxury items that helped maintain morale, tea, silk clothing for special occasions, writing materials so workers could send letters home, and even musical instruments to provide entertainment during the long winter months when construction slowed. Medical care was primitive by modern standards but remarkably sophisticated for its time. Military doctors had experience treating wounds and injuries, but the construction environment presented new challenges. Respiratory problems from stone dust, repetitive stress injuries from the constant lifting and carrying, and nutritional deficiencies from the limited diet available in remote locations. Traditional Chinese medicine filled many gaps, with herbalists collecting medicinal plants from the surrounding wilderness and acupuncturists treating everything from back pain to depression. The wall's construction also created an unexpected cultural exchange. Workers from different regions of China found themselves working side by side, sharing techniques, recipes, stories, and dialects. Southern workers brought their knowledge of rice cultivation and water management, while Northerners contributed their expertise in horse breeding and leather working. This mixing of regional traditions helped create a more unified Chinese culture, fulfilling the emperor's vision in ways he might not have anticipated. Foreign influences also appeared along the wall. Trade routes brought materials and techniques from Central Asia, including new methods for making waterproof mortar and techniques for decorative stonework. Some sections of the wall show clear influences from Persian and Indian architectural traditions, evidence of the cosmopolitan nature of the Chinese Empire even in its earliest days. The seasonal rhythm of construction created its own culture. Spring brought renewed energy and optimism as workers emerged from winter quarters and resumed major building projects. Summer was the season of maximum productivity, with long days allowing extended work hours and warm weather making the harsh northern climate bearable. Autumn was a race against time, with crews working frantically to complete sections before winter made construction impossible. Winter transformed the construction sites into different worlds entirely. Work didn't stop completely, but it shifted from major construction to maintenance, planning, and preparation for the following year's building season. Workers would repair tools, process materials, and engage in the detailed planning that made large-scale construction possible. These winter months also became times for storytelling, cultural exchange, and the development of the rich folklore that still surrounds the Great Wall today. As you settle deeper into rest, imagine the ancient workers gathered around their fires on a clear winter night, the completed sections of wall standing silent guard behind them, the stars wheeling overhead in patterns that seemed to mirror the great structure they were building stone by stone, day by day, across the vast landscape of their emerging nation. As centuries flow like water over stone, let yourself drift forward through time to see how the Great Wall became not just a structure, but a living part of Chinese civilization. The wall that emerged from Emperor Qin Shi Huang's vision was only the beginning of a story that would unfold across 2 millennia, evolving with each dynasty that inherited this ancient marvel. When the Qin dynasty fell in 206 BCE, barely 15 years after the wall's initial completion, many wondered if the great structure would crumble along with the empire that built it. But the wall had already taken on a life of its own. The Han dynasty, which rose to power in 202 BCE, not only maintained the existing structure but extended it even further west, pushing deep into what is now Xinjiang province as trade along the Silk Road made frontier protection increasingly important. The Han emperors understood something crucial about the wall: it wasn't just a military installation, but an economic engine. The gates and watchtowers became natural collection points for customs duties on trade caravans. The military garrison stationed along the wall created markets for local goods and services. Entire communities sprang up in the shadow of the fortifications, their prosperity tied directly to the steady flow of soldiers, merchants, and government officials that the wall attracted. Picture these Han-era wall communities on a typical market day. Mongolian herders would bring their horses and cattle to trade for Chinese silk, tea, and manufactured goods. Buddhist monks traveling the Silk Road would stop to rest and resupply. Military contractors would haggle over the price of grain and fodder for the garrison horses. The wall had become a membrane rather than a barrier, permeable to trade and cultural exchange while still serving its primary defensive function. The most remarkable aspect of the wall's evolution was how it adapted to changing military technology and tactics. When nomadic tribes began using more sophisticated cavalry tactics, wall designers responded by increasing the height of the ramparts and developing new types of watchtowers that could house crossbow units and early artillery. When siege engines became more common, the wall was reinforced with additional layers of stone and earth to absorb the impact of catapult stones. During the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, often considered the golden age of Chinese civilization, the wall's role shifted once again. The Tang emperors were confident in their military power and more interested in expansion than defense. Large sections of the wall were allowed to deteriorate as resources were redirected toward conquering Central Asia and establishing Chinese influence as far west as modern-day Kazakhstan. But the wall's cultural significance only grew during this period of relative neglect. Poets wrote verses about the lonely sentries walking the ramparts under starlit skies. Artists painted landscapes that featured the wall winding through misty mountains like a dragon's spine. The wall was becoming embedded in Chinese consciousness not just as a military necessity, but as a symbol of national identity and cultural achievement. The Song dynasty, 960–1279 CE, brought new challenges that revitalized interest in the wall. Pressure from the Liao and Jin dynasties in the north forced the Song emperors to strengthen border defenses, but they faced a fundamental problem: they lacked the resources and manpower to maintain the entire length of the ancient wall. Their solution was innovative. Instead of trying to rebuild everything, they concentrated their efforts on the most strategically important sections, creating a series of heavily fortified strongpoints connected by lighter defensive works. This period saw remarkable innovations in wall construction. Song engineers developed new types of mortar that were more resistant to weathering and earthquake damage. They experimented with different stone-cutting techniques that created stronger joints between blocks. Most importantly, they began incorporating gunpowder weapons into wall defenses, creating the first purpose-built artillery positions in the structure's long history. The Mongol conquest of China in 1271 temporarily ended the wall's defensive role, since the Mongols ruled on both sides of the structure. But even during the Yuan dynasty, the wall continued to serve important functions. It became a framework for communication networks, with the ancient signal fire system adapted to help administer the vast Mongol Empire. Trading posts established at wall gates continued to flourish, now serving the expanded commercial networks that connected China to Europe and the Middle East. The wall's most famous reconstruction came during the Ming dynasty, 1368–1644 CE, when the Chinese expelled the Mongols and re-established native rule. The Ming emperors faced renewed pressure from Mongol tribes and other northern neighbors, but they also had access to new technologies and organizational methods that allowed them to rebuild the wall on an unprecedented scale. This Ming-era reconstruction is what most people think of when they picture the Great Wall today. Using brick instead of stone in many sections, incorporating sophisticated drainage systems, and featuring those iconic battlements and watchtowers that appear in countless photographs, the Ming Wall was both more beautiful and more functional than any previous version. The Ming construction employed hundreds of thousands of workers, but the character of the workforce had changed dramatically since the Qin era. Instead of corvée laborers and prisoners, the Ming relied heavily on professional soldiers and paid craftsmen. These workers were better fed, better housed, and better equipped than their ancient predecessors. The result was not just a stronger wall, but one built with a level of craftsmanship that still impresses visitors today. Advanced engineering techniques allowed the Ming builders to create walls that followed the natural contours of the landscape more effectively than ever before. Instead of fighting against the terrain, they worked with it, creating a structure that seems to grow naturally from the mountains and valleys it crosses. This harmony between human engineering and natural landscape became one of the wall's most celebrated aesthetic qualities. As you drift deeper into peaceful sleep, imagine standing on a Ming-era watchtower at sunset, looking out over the vast landscape that the wall has protected for nearly 2,000 years. The structure beneath your feet represents not just military engineering, but the accumulated wisdom, sacrifice, and artistic vision of countless generations of Chinese people, all working toward a common goal that transcended any individual lifetime. As our journey through time draws to a peaceful close, Let yourself rest in the gentle embrace of history's longest dream made manifest in stone and earth. The Great Wall of China stands today not merely as an ancient fortification, but as a bridge between past and present, between the earth and sky, between human ambition and natural beauty. When the last emperor of the Ming dynasty fell in 1644, the wall's active military role finally came to an end. The Qin dynasty, established by the Manchus who had conquered China from the north, saw little need to maintain fortifications against their former homeland. For nearly 3 centuries, the Great Wall was left to the patient care of weather, vegetation, and time itself. But abandonment brought its own kind of beauty. Sections of the wall became integrated into the natural landscape in ways their builders never imagined. Trees took root in cracks between stones, their branches creating natural ladders for vines and flowering plants. Birds built nests in the ancient watchtowers, and small animals made homes in the spaces between the outer walls. The wall became a linear ecosystem, a habitat unlike anywhere else on Earth. Local communities along the wall's route developed their own relationships with the ancient structure. Farmers used stones from damaged sections to build houses and field walls, while still maintaining an almost spiritual reverence for the monument's historical significance. Children grew up playing games on the ramparts, lovers met secretly in secluded watchtowers, and grandparents shared stories of the wall's construction that had been passed down through dozens of generations. The wall's rediscovery by the modern world began in the early 20th century, when foreign explorers and archaeologists started documenting its condition and extent. What they found was both heartbreaking and inspiring, a structure that had suffered tremendous damage from centuries of neglect, but which retained an undeniable majesty that spoke across the millennia to contemporary observers. The most remarkable discovery was how much the wall had taught the landscape around it. Agricultural techniques developed by communities living near the wall had created terraced farming systems that echoed the structure's engineering principles. Water management systems followed patterns established by the wall's builders. Even local dialects showed influences from the mixing of regional languages that had occurred during the Great Construction periods. The People's Republic of China's establishment in 1949 brought renewed attention to the wall, but also new challenges. The Cultural Revolution saw some sections damaged by those who viewed ancient monuments as symbols of feudal oppression. But this period also saw the beginning of serious conservation efforts, as archaeologists and engineers worked to develop new techniques for preserving earthen and stone construction in harsh environmental conditions. Today's Great Wall is a palimpsest, a document that has been written upon repeatedly throughout history, with each layer of text still partially visible beneath the next. Visitors can see Qin-era earthworks, Han Dynasty stone foundations, Ming brick construction, and modern restoration efforts, all integrated into a single, flowing structure that tells the story of Chinese civilization itself. The wall has become a powerful symbol of human possibility, proof that even the most ambitious dreams can be realized through patience, cooperation, and sustained effort across generations. But it's also a reminder of the cost of such achievements, the hundreds of thousands who died in its construction, the families separated by corvée labor, the communities disrupted by the massive resource requirements of such a project. Modern conservation efforts strive to balance preservation with accessibility, allowing millions of visitors each year to experience the wall while protecting it for future generations. New technologies, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and advanced materials science, are helping archaeologists understand sections of the wall that have been hidden for centuries and develop better methods for preventing further deterioration. Perhaps most remarkably, the wall continues to evolve even today. Artists incorporate its imagery into contemporary works. Writers use it as a metaphor for division and connection. Urban planners study its relationship with the landscape to inform modern infrastructure projects. The ancient structure continues to teach new lessons to each generation that encounters it. Climate change presents new challenges for wall preservation. Increasing temperature variations cause more rapid expansion and contraction of stone and mortar. Changes in precipitation patterns affect the stability of earthen sections. But these same challenges are spurring innovations in conservation techniques that may help preserve not just the Great Wall, but other threatened monuments around the world. The wall's greatest power may lie in its ability to make the abstract concept of deep time tangible and personal. Standing before stones placed by workers who lived over 2,000 years ago, visitors can literally touch the past in a way that makes history immediate and real. The wall becomes a meditation on continuity, on the way human effort can accumulate across generations to create something that transcends any individual lifetime. As you settle into the deepest, most peaceful sleep, let yourself become part of this continuing story. Feel the weight of centuries settling gently over you like a soft blanket, carrying the dreams and aspirations of all the countless people who contributed to this magnificent structure. The Great Wall of China stands eternal in the moonlight, a testament to the power of human imagination made real through patience, sacrifice, and the shared dream of building something beautiful that will outlast us all. Rest now in the shadow of this ancient wonder, knowing that you too are part of the continuing story of human achievement, and that your own dreams, however humble, contribute to the great wall of hope and possibility that each generation builds for the next. Sleep well, and let the gentle spirits of those ancient builders watch over your dreams.